with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more. Saturdays with Renee.
Yes. What's up, world? Welcome, episode 63 of Saturdays with Renee, featuring Renee Johnston. I'm Jared Ball. Welcome to Black Liberation Media. And yes, do as James has done out the gate. Hit the like button.
Out the gate.
Subscribe. Support the Patreon. All the links in the show description, as is the article from our guest this week. Renee, what's up? How you doing?
I am as well as capitalism will allow, my friend. As well as capitalism will allow. I'm here, though.
There's a definite ceiling on that for sure.
Man, listen. I can't. I'm
definitely
so over
a
it.
Ceiling.
So over it.
Yeah.
But it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
So why don't we get right on it? Because I want to make sure that we have as much time with Essam as life allows before before 12:57.
All right. Well, Essam is here, so welcome. Peace. Good morning.
Hello. You can hear me and see me well?
Yep, we got you. I'm so excited that you're here. I almost don't even know if to do it myself. And so thank you very much for joining. I don't normally read bios. I like to let people introduce themselves, but your bio from Black Agenda Report is so concise and well done that I feel like it's actually like worth reading out loud so everyone knows who you are. Because I also feel like you have a way of like downplaying all the things that you do. And I don't want anybody to get it twisted, because you are truly like, you're a gem, and I so appreciate all of your input. Essam and I are part of the global Pan-African movement, and so I get the joys of when he has time to throw commentary into our group chat to be able to see, to get his wealth of information and input. So I'll read this real quick, and then Essam will let you add whatever you want to add, if anything. So Essam is a Libyan PhD student at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He researches Libya's modern political history and contemporary imperialism in education. He is a labor organizer with the Graduate Employees Organization, an assistant editor for the Middle East Critique Journal, a member of the Global Pan-African Movement, and serves on the International Advisory Board of Pamzuka News. So,
yes.
Essam, welcome. And is there anything that you want to add to your bio?
No, nothing that I can say right now, but I just want to say thank you for having me here. And concerning Bambazuka news, I think a lot of Pan-Africanists or anti-imperialists who have been in the struggle or have been reading stuff about anti-imperialism might know it, and they might have heard that it died out in 2019. Yeah. Right now it's getting revived, and so by the beginning of 2025. You're gonna start seeing Bambazuka being out there, so that's why you see.
That's really good news.
Yeah. Because for me, when I started doing my PhD, there is nothing related to Libya as part of Africa that is out on the mainstream media except that website. And because most of the literature that dominates, Libya, it's an Arab country and it's a Mediterranean country, and that's it. And so getting access to that website, it really helped me to challenge those normative liberal narratives about what happened in Libya. And this also tells you about the fact that despite the fact that I'm from Libya and I live in Libya and so forth, it doesn't mean that you get automatically all this knowledge about the country. So one has to still go and dig deep to get political consciousness. So, yeah. But no, thank you for the introduction, Renee.
Thank you. So I'll just let everybody know. Last week we mentioned that we were holding out to see if you would make it after your 3 days of travel. And so I'm glad you made it safely home, and I hope you are getting set to enjoy some time with the family. But I'll let the audience, just a reminder for the audience, that as things transpired in Syria and we were all watching this this whole scenario just unfold, Essam shared a note in our group chat about what this was going to do to the axis of resistance and the effect that it would have on Palestine. And then I remembered, which not really remembered, but it just kind of jumped out to remind me that Essam is from Libya and, you know, has bared witness to what transpired in Libya. And I started thinking about the parallels between what happened then in Libya and what is happening now in Syria. And I just felt like he would be one of the best people that we could bring to you all to talk about this situation as it's unfolded, to match it to the history, and to kind of engage in this conversation about this axis of resistance and what is, you know, what happens now. And then, of course, you published an article in Black Agenda Report, which was literally exactly what I was asking you about. So it was perfect. And so I guess, you know, Jared, did you have any starting questions before we kind of jump into it?
No, I have just some general reactions. I enjoyed the Black Agenda piece, and then I've been just generally keeping up, you know, with Ben Norton's work and other outlets talking about the situation. And so no, I don't have any particular question. I just wanted to, I'm just happy to invite maybe some initial overview thoughts or an overview summary of what the piece in Bar was saying. But it just seems, you know, this confluence again of colonialism, of Zionism, of increased now engagement with, as Ben Norton's been talking about, the rebranded Al Qaeda. What did he say that they're diversity friendly jihadists is what the West is calling them now. Like this is. So it's good to have some clarity. So because the what seems to be happening, absent some good context, important context, is just bananas and bizarre. So yeah, but thank you. So yeah, no specific question, just an invitation to maybe give your overview summary thoughts of what's going on, catch us up, and then Renee, I'm happy to again just follow the lead.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think we tend to read much of the same counter mainstream media. So I always, you know, commend people for reading The Intercept, Drop Site News, The Gray Zone, the work of, you know, Max Blumenthal, Ben Norton. I know they have some beef between them, but still, you know, let's just leave that on the side. But
yeah, we do too, but it's all good. And when they're right, they're right. It's all good.
Exactly, yeah. So nobody has a perfect, you know, and this, I think this is also part of my argument in that article that I said there are imperfections with any political stances, with any political movement, but, you know, Western Marxists, they tend to have this idealist image. Oh, there's a contradiction, you know, Bashar is killing his people, you know, imprisoning them, so the whole regime needs to be out. Gaddafi, you know, he forcefully kicked out, you know, people from privatized lands and things like that, and nationalized a lot of the land. Oh, this is oppression. So this is bad. This is authoritarianism. So it needs to be overthrown. So I think this is a lot of what Western media tends to play on to legitimize this idea of overthrowing a regime. They just hook to one small thing that they have a documentation of, and as if it legitimizes the complete demise of the country. And, you know, when I'm seeing what's happening in Syria, it's like the same film is being played in front of my eyes to what exactly happened in Libya. You have sanctions on the country. That's one thing. And the other thing is that you have this global forces that are coming in to overthrow a regime that was, and if you notice that Western media always like to say, Norwegian government, German government, American government, but when they don't like somebody, they say regime. as if it has no legitimacy, doesn't have a structure. It's a kind of a regime of power that has a constellation of forces, and they control people through the use of force, right? So, but going back to what was happening is that you had the global forces that went to do a revolution, an uprising to change the people in power, and then you have Islamist jihadists that have had history with being trained by either the CIA or MI6, and so. You see this guy, Julani or Mohammed Shara, right? And now, 10 years ago, he used to have this massive beard. And saying we want to declare Syria and Iraq and the rest of Levant as Islamic State. And the United States had a bounty on his head. And if you look, I think as of today, if you go on the website and look at the website that says there's a $10 million bounty, if he gets, served to the Americans and the Americans can hold him captive, that website just shut off and said that page is no longer available. And so, anyway, so all of these Islamists, they were used and trained for strategically being to overthrow the government in Syria. Similarly, if I may, you will have in Libya, you had the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which is a group that was started by the MI6 in roughly early 90s, late 80s, and they were trained with the Taliban in Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union, and they had training with them. And then in 1996, they flown to Libya and tried to assassinate Muammar Gaddafi. And they did terrorist attacks, bombings, and so forth. And then there was a war between the Libyan National Army in 1996 and those terrorists, right? And then Abdel Hakim Bilhaj was one of them. He fled the country. In 2006, he was, delivered to Libya. And then in 2011, he came out and he declared even, a war on the government. And then there was this quote by Horace Campbell, whom we all love, I'm pretty sure, Renee, is that he wrote a book called The Global NATO and Catastrophic Failure in Libya. And there's this very good quote. It says what the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group were not able to achieve in 1996, they were able to achieve with the help of NATO. So now I'm talking about these two kind of Islamist, neoliberal forces that are going to be taking over both of countries that had a modicum of socialisms. And I have to argue that Libya's socialism is much more advanced than Syria's because of the different geopolitical and natural resources and so forth, right? So now what's happening, in this past year, since, even before October 7, 2023, Syria has been this place where, historically for us, people in the Arab region, and it really hurts me to say this, and I've never even felt devastated for a geopolitical event as much as this that happened in Syria, because of its weight in the Arab history. A place of, cultural production, art, language, you name it. It was just, it's a place where we always looked up to it, even their TV shows and so forth. They were always fascinating. A lot of the Libyans who also wanted to master the Arabic language and the Arabic poetry, to go and study there in Syria. So now that is kind of like, it's a civilizational war that was what Syria has experienced since 2011, the sanctions and the bombings and the funding of these jihadists. So now when you destroy that country, and you hand it off to these Islamists, something is going to shift. The Syrian government, since they realize that there's going to be a war funded by Qatar, U.S. proxy, and then you have the Saudi Wahhabists and the Islamists and so forth coming in to destroy the country, they did an alliance with whoever wanted to help them. And so Bashar al-Assad sought help from Russia, right? So Orthodox country, not Muslim. Right. And then he sought help from Lebanon and sought help from anybody from the neighbors. Iraq is divided. So part of the Iraqi society said, we're not going to support this guy because we want American freedom and so forth. And the other half, the Shia part. And then they supported Bashar al-Assad. So you have the Hezbollah, you have Iraq, and then Iran. Now, it became very clear that this fight, that is, the Sunnis, which I am Sunni myself, they want to overthrow the regime and be doing service for imperialism. Meanwhile, the other ones, they want to keep Syria intact and keep the government intact, and so that does not get destroyed. At the same time, because of these terrorist Sunni Islamists, they have no role in the question of Palestine. Meanwhile, Iran and Hezbollah, they're the ones who have actually launched rockets and have been fighting against the Zionist entity for many years, and not just since October 7th. And so the groups that have come in to support the government of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, to stay, they are the ones that are fighting against Western imperialism. So now this is not a fight between, Iranian imperialism and American imperialism. It's a fight between, there's no such thing as Iranian imperialism. Iran cannot impose sanctions on other countries, cannot overthrow governments, cannot do, what the work of MI6 and CIA do, and so forth. So they came in and just in support to supplant the expansion of imperialism. And they have succeeded in that. But in recent, since October 7th, we have to acknowledge that the only people who are losing their limbs and losing their livelihoods and are suffering and are being bombed are the Palestinian people, Hezbollah, and Iran, and also the resistance factions within, Yemen, the Houthis, and then within Iraq. They're the ones who are sacrificing themselves. So now there's this land bridge that connects Hezbollah in Lebanon with Iran, and they are being supported through Iraq and Syria. And that land bridge is undermined because of, the overthrow of the government that took place in Syria. And the people who took power, they were supported and trained largely by the Zionist entity and the Americans. So now that Syria as a link between, this axis of resistance that's so close to the Zionist entity, meaning land-wise, has been completely undermined. And now even the ones who took power, a lot of the Muslims, we tend to be taught that the Zionists are a threat to us and so forth. But then you have these new Islamists who are running Syria right now. They're killing the Shia, and they're saying, no, it's okay that the Zionists are taking over half of Syria right now. They said we're not going to allow Syria to be a launch pad of U.S. of anybody's rockets against the Zionist entity. So they really are defending the Zionist entity, because as if there's an agreement. So they're part of this. I call them Zionist Islamists, because it's not that anybody could be Zionist. You can be Christian Zionist, you can be Jewish Zionist, you can be atheist Zionist. And this is the idea that you think that those people who believe in Zionism should have a right to the land that's constantly expanding. And lastly, I've been going on a ramble just because it's very hurtful what's happening in Syria right now, is that when I say Zionist entity, I'm not saying it just as a way to legitimize the existence of a country or a state. But if we think about it, it is the only so-called country that does not have set borders. It does not say, okay, Gaza is this border, and then the West Bank is this, and then we're never going to expand. They're constantly expanding into the West Bank every day, demolishment, building of settlements. You go to LA, you see auctions of Palestinian lands being, bought by these Zionists, settler colonialists. And then right now, the government in Syria falls, they went beyond the Golan Heights, the agreement that they had ceasefire. Same thing they tried in 1967. They took out the Sinai Peninsula. They always have this idea of the greater so-called Israel. So it's always existing threat. It's not just a country that exists and respects other people's borders. It's not that. Hence, it's an entity. It's a very dangerous entity. And then we can eventually talk about this question of development, because it's not just about change of government, in my view. It's about question of national development in the region. But those are just my introductory, lengthy remarks, and I apologize for being a little bit
it's great.
Emotional about it.
I know. I was about to say, please don't apologize.
And Renee, if I can, I wanted to highlight literally this one part from Essam's article here that just to emphasize what is being said here about how important this is. The end of Syria is a loss for the Arabs that the region has not experienced anything like it since 1967, when the Zionist entity took over the Golan Heights and swiftly annexed the Sinai Peninsula. In my view, it's even worse, because not only is Syria being destroyed here, but people are celebrating it as a revolution and a liberation of Syria. And it is done by mostly indigenous hands, as opposed to foreign entities inflicting this upon us, like what the region witnessed in 1967. So I thought that was a powerful statement. And as I'm having somewhat of a sad, comical exchange in the chat with Dre about this monstrosity Tyler Perry just reinflicted on us through Netflix, it's the same kind of point being done to Black history here. in slower motion and through media more than overtly through bullets, although there's plenty of that as well. But the point being that what should be seen as imperial colonial conquest is represented back to audiences and projected with the intent of it being seen as liberating. Whether it's the stories of Black people serving the U.S. military, or more egregiously in the case of what you're talking about here, it's like we're supposed to all celebrate this and be waving our flags and getting excited. And it's like, no, this is not a victory, damn it. So anyway, so forgive me for that. I just wanted to emphasize that one point there real quick.
No, and I think it's important. So Angela says it here. No apologies. Everything you said was important, and I'm gonna need to go back and like watch this later and really take it all in, because this is part of the problem. Is Western media is so confusing with what they present as like the factual information, right? So if you watch CNN and you hear them talk about, you know, oh, we've got rid of the dictator, right? And this presentation, and you don't understand the history of the region, and you don't understand that the person CNN interviewed is the same person that had a $10 million price on his head, right? If you don't have that information, it's very confusing to keep track of, well, you know, who exactly are we supposed to support here? Now, my rule of thumb is always support the person who's against the imperialist, right? Like that's my baseline of normality, right? Like support the person who does not want the takeover of empire and the expansion of U.S. hegemony. But you know, that's me. So, but it really is difficult to understand what's happening because there is no real information, and people don't have time to seek out the real history, and they don't have time to study and to read, and they just don't. And that also is intentional. Like it's the role of imperialism to keep people, you know, spinning on their hamster wheels, and to never, you know, get to a place where they feel like they can stop and actually make sense of the nonsense that they're being told. So I thank you sincerely for going into that history. And you know, I hadn't considered how personally painful this was for you. So I want to acknowledge that as well, right? And I've got nothing to help but in hopes that you understand the solidarity and that we stand with you, and you know, we're watching and hoping that things don't just keep going like this, because this is, you know, I don't have any, Lord knows, I really don't want it to keep going like this. So you mentioned, and I mentioned, go ahead.
I just have a quick thing. I think you mentioned a very important point where it's kind of like, you said that you support, I was waiting for you and saying inside, please don't say, I just support the Syrian people. But then you said, I support whoever is standing up against imperialism. You know, and this is the same thing when you say, I support the Libyan people, but there's so many Libyan people with different opinions, so many Syrian people. I mean, the last 13 years are a testament to how much diversity exists within the Syrian society, such that since the outbreak of this imperialist imposed war on Syria, you didn't have, you know, the Western-backed people, and then you have the Syrian government, and that's it. You had the Kurds, and then you had the, you know, the Islamists, and you had the Islamic State, and then you have the rebel forces who claim themselves to be the moderate rebels, who are, you know, just essentially liberals. So all of these, when people say, oh, I stand with the Syrian people, I'm like, which one? The same thing when they say, oh, we brought in this Libyan scholar to speak about Libya, as if that gives legitimacy to what they're going to say. So it depends, and I urge also your speakers and yourselves to criticize me and critique me, because just because the fact that I'm Libyan, that doesn't mean, you know, my position on imperialism, which is the primary contradiction, is, you know, the thing that should be fought. constantly, because it is the thing that is causing the most devastation ecologically, the most loss of life, the most unequal exchange of goods and services between people, and the most exploitation in the world. This is the system that we call, us people who are anti-imperialists, as the primary contradiction, the system of imperialism. So standing up with a Libyan or with a Syrian people, that we should factor in that equation. But so yeah, no, I just wanna thank you for noting that, because sometimes people get into the mantra, oh, let's just hear the local people's voices, but it's very it's very divisive, these local people's voices. So I just want to say thank you for bringing that up.
No problem. And it's divisive here, right? Like, if anyone were to say, like, we're going to stand with the the people of the US, like, who, right? Like, it's an entire country of people, and everyone has different notions. And you have people who are very comfortable living in their bubble of imperialism because they are profiting from that, right? And you have people who are comfortable living in the bubble of imperialism because maybe they're not profiting as much, but they live in a nice house and they have a nice car and they can do whatever they want to do, right? And they have no considerations of what this means to other people, right? And so, like I tell people all the time, I don't complain about this stuff because I'm not okay, right? My husband has a job, like, we live in a house, we're okay. Like, listen, we're no far beyond most people. Like, it could take one thing and we might not be okay again. But, but my constant focus is like, who's not okay and why are they not okay? And the why is always the same thing, right? It's literally always the same thing. Greed, imperialism, capitalism, like, it's always the same thing. And I really just it's important to me that people start to really understand how much of the core of every problem around the world is the same people. It's the same Western fools, running about the place trying to expand how much they can steal and how much they can make off of what they've stolen. So thank you for for catching that. So one of the things I'd say, we had a back and forth about two different, like three or four different topics. And so could you go into a little bit more this parallel between what happened in Libya and what is happening in Syria now? Because, a lot of, I think what people don't understand is that what the US does consistently is rinse and repeat, right? Like, they do something in one place, it works, they take over, they create a mess, and then they go somewhere and they do the same exact thing all over again. And that parallel for me between Libya and Syria was so clear. Could you talk on that a little bit?
Yeah. When you historicize something, you have to be true to the facts that exist on the ground, and denying, saying like this thing doesn't exist, or denialism is, it really reduces our credibility as people who are anti-imperialists. So sometimes people like to, romanticize the perfection of the government or the country to just, fight off or be counter-imperialist, counter propaganda in that sense. So, when we look at Libya in 2010 and Syria in 2010, you will see, stable economic growth. In Libya was very exponential because we just got out of the sanctions, and there was, Libya had, ranked roughly 40 in the Human Development Index, a massive oil wealth being redistributed to the people, investment across of the Pan-African projects in the country. So Libya was going up in that direction. But there was a disconnect, largely ideological, between the Libyan masses and the leadership of the country. And this, even when I reflect on it, I never knew what African unity meant when I was, in Libya, living through that era. But then right now, when I retrospectively think about it, I start to learn, oh, this is why the government was doing these things. So there was a disconnect between the popularity of the things that they were doing. They were popular in themselves, but the Libyans did not interpolate them. So when they went out and protested and wanted a regime change, it was something that the West has wanted for 40 some years. And I say that because people say, no, Libya was in the bed with the West. Go read the emails from the US Embassy since 2003 in Libya. They're always constantly complaining why Libya has sided with Russia and China for the construction plans of Libya, for the developmental projects, for its investments. They said we lifted the sanctions thinking that Libya is going to be investing in European markets, but it didn't. It just withdrew, it took all its money and pumped it into Africa instead, and funded that African Development Bank and the Central Bank of Africa and so forth. So it was a project, and now that kind of imperialist contradiction, and you see some people going out in the street, they wanted the same thing. So there is a recipe, and this recipe has existed, and I always like to go back to a country that not a lot of people speak about, which is Yugoslavia. You see the same recipe of how protests transformed from peaceful to violent. There is always an instigation by protesters to use violence in order to get more violence in response. And there's literally a handbook by the National Endowment of Democracy of how to conduct these protests. I'm not saying that Libyans, all of us, were trained by the National Endowment of Democracy, but there's always saying that this regime is ruthless and it only knows how to fight with power. So you start thinking, oh, we must go and ransack police stations. We must go and get weapons and arm ourselves against this government. Now, if you look at what happened in Kenya in August this year, there were protests against the tax hikes. The US government went out and said, we condemn the violence by protesters and we urge peaceful protesting. The other times when unfriendly governments, they have protests and clashes between the government and the protesters, you start hearing the same thing saying, oh, we denounce the violence being used against protesters. So it's always, sometimes they try to calm people down. The other ones, they say government should calm down and let the protesters do whatever they want. So you look at, the situation in Croatia, in Bosnia, and then in Kosovo and Metohija, when they were out and protested, it was the exact same process that transformed protesters to, civil wars or civil unrest. Same thing in Libya. Now, the difference between Libya and Syria is that Libya happened before Syria. The violence, started from the first 4 or 5 days in Libya, where they started, instead of going to public squares, they went to military barracks and police stations, tried to steal weapons from there, the protesters. So they turned violent from the beginning. But then you read United Nations, what they said. They said, we're going to come and intervene because we want to do two things. No-fly zone, which sounds okay. Gaddafi, Libyan government said, we don't, okay, that's okay, no-fly zone. And then they said, we're going to stop anybody who's going to attack civilians. The Libyan government was like, okay. And even Russia and China, those who are more skeptical of the West, they didn't vote yes, they just abstained. Because the wording of the language said that they're going to just impose a no-fly zone and they're going to stop violence against civilians. Now, what does that mean? Obviously, when imperialists say something, you always should question their class positionality. It means that they have been transformed to serving as the rebels' air force, and that the rebels, when they conduct crimes against humanity, they will not be, bombed by NATO. So that's what happened in Libya. Now, in Syria, the situation got a little bit different because you had the same, they said, oh, okay, it worked in Libya in 2012. They tried to do the same thing, but then vetoed by Russia and China. And they said there should not be a United Nations sanctioned intervention by NATO. So eventually what happened is that the United States and its proxies, they said, okay, we're going to start sending these Islamists from across the world, especially from Iraq beginning, and then they're all going to infiltrate Syria and start doing these terrorist attacks and so forth. So this is how the Libyan example was applied to Syria, but differently. Now, differently in terms of different actors on the ground. And Libya was so fast-paced, but the Syrian government learned from what happened in Libya. And I'm sure that China and Russia also learned from what happened in Libya. So now these are kind of the two, how they both started. the reason for why they want these countries to, be destroyed, Western imperialists, I think was exemplified by, I also mentioned it in the article, is that it has been a project of the West since, 9/11 events that happened, that they want to overthrow sovereign governments. And this was mentioned by Wesley Clark. Wesley Clark, who currently, is a senior advisor for the Atlantic Council, you should go look up that council. He was the one who was the head of NATO's mission in Yugoslavia to go and bomb and destroy Yugoslavia. When they went and bombed Yugoslavia, did they go and bomb the military stations and that's it, or the Ministry of Defense and that's it? No, they went also and attacked developmental infrastructure, oil refineries, railroad tracks, power stations, and caused so much, infrastructural destruction. So why would they do that? Because you accumulate imperialism, you can accumulate through war, through destruction. By destroying a country, you can say, we could come and help build it for you. So, but then if there's no destruction, there's nothing to be built, right? So there was always that endeavor that you destroy in order to accumulate, a different form of accumulation through destruction. In Libya and Syria, they are doing the exact same thing, destroying the country. And right now you see Turkey and the United States are so happy we're coming in to invest into Syria and, rebuild the country. So the project of this development that they want after NATO imperialist intervention tends to be in the format as such. They destroy, impose a new government, and the new government is pro-West, that it does not have this idea of sovereign developmental project. They have this idea of neoliberalism, foreign capital infiltration, privatization of land reform, so it gets privatized. And so all of this whole script is, applied in Yugoslavia, it applied in Iraq, it's applying in Libya, and right now it's going to apply in Syria. And if you notice, even in the article that I mentioned, it's not about just merely a regime change, it's about question of development. Because if you have a sovereign development that is anti-imperialist, and what do I mean by it? Is that you create an economy that is self-reliant and self-sufficient, as opposed to an economy that's based on taking debt from the West, and 40% of your GDP ends up paying that debt and servicing it every years for the next 30 years with 10% interest rates and so forth. If you transform that into a regional economy where you trade the goods and services that you need with your regional partner, you create polycenters. You won't do accumulation by dispossession, like if you cannot pay the loan, your land gets taken by IMF and the World Bank. That is a sovereign developmental model. When people who are being imposed by the West to take over these countries after a color revolution, they always tend to be not critical of these things, or they tend to be pro of the imperialist status quo. Same as Iraq, same as Yugoslavia, same as Libya, and we will experience that also in Syria, unfortunately. So the question of development, you see it. Why is it that a lot of these countries that exist in East Asia and Western Asia, they look so economically developed, such as so-called Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and then you go to the Zionist entity and you see, oh my God, they're economically advanced. It's a part of this imperialist project to create countries or entities that have technological developments. Why? Because the West allowed technological transfer. It didn't use monopoly against them. At the same time, allow them to develop such that they become a military outposts. How many, American soldiers exist in South Korea? 28,000. How many exist in the island of Formosa, Taiwan? How many in Japan? And how many in the Zionist entity? How many in Qatar and UAE? So they were allowed to be developed. They were never sanctioned. They were never had, a color revolution in those contexts, because they wanted to be developed with subservient status. Now, with that subservient status is that whenever you have an actual government in the region that wants to develop, that buffer zone of imperialism, it gets to attack it. So that's why Qatar and UAE attacked Libya. It's that's why, a lot of people, they tend to forget, they think it's NATO that did it. There were 2 Arab countries that came and attacked Libya with their bombs and planes and, and destruction. But then you say, well, these are Muslims. Well, okay, we're Sunnis, they're Sunnis. Why did they bomb us? because they are part of this imperialist system. They're part of this buffer zone that imperialists try to create. And this buffer zone is expanding, and through the destruction of Syria, it expanded as well. So this is how the similarities, I think, should be, could be viewed. And I like to view them through the work of, Ali Qadari, who wrote about, this development in Eastern Asia and Western Asia being similar. And this is the idea of imperialism in those two regions. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's what I needed. You used the term in your article, consumer hubs, which I thought was a brilliant way to to kind of lay out, the plan, because you cannot expand empire without taking over these places and creating spaces where people are buying from you and borrowing from you and utilizing your imports and not making anything, right? Not participating in local trade. And so when I read that, I was like, that is such a great way to put it, a consumer hub, because I don't think people realize, and I certainly didn't before I read it in those words, like this is really what they're creating, like a space for people to just participate in capitalism, right? And not participate in their own sovereignty. And I think I wanted to say that out loud, that would be a great,
actually, a lot of people like to use the example of money oil for food that existed in Iraq when it was under the sanctions. So what happened is that Iraq, because of the sanctions, they weren't able to export their oil. But then they said, but you're starving our people. So I said, okay, if you export the oil, we're going to send you food. And this was like imperialist imposed, and I know I'm simplifying it a bit, but imperialist imposed system. Look at Libya right now. Before 2011, we used to spend below 40% of our year annual expenditure or GDP on importation of foods and products from elsewhere to feed the people. Right now, my God, it's like 85 or 90% of what we spend of our GDP on imported foods because we lost our industry. You say factory, it's easier to, as a capitalist, and me as a Libyan, to get a letter of credit from the central bank, meaning transferring my Libyan dinars to US dollars, buy the good and buying it not from black market, because black market would be much more expensive to exchange rate. Right? So I get it from the central bank official rate, go buy stuff from Turkey, go buy stuff from Tunisia with US dollars. So now, Libya got the oil, exported it, got US dollar in return, and they give me part of those US dollars. What do? I ship those US dollars to Turkey or to Tunisia or Egypt, buy their food products, and get the food products inside Libya's stores. The Libyan people, even if you visit Libya right now, you look at our stores, you'll be like, wow, you have 15 types of cheeses that exist in front of you, 20 types of milks from Poland, from Turkey, from Germany, from whatever. And this gives you the impression that the Libyan society has a choice. But this is part of capitalist modernity, that the idea of happiness could be, achieved through utilitarianism, meaning the satisfaction through consuming of products. And so now you go and you see all of these products exist there, and you be like, okay, Libya's economy is good, but then turns constantly oil being exported, you get money, and then you use that money not for industry, not for development, you're using it just to feed off your people, as opposed to having an industry of farming, of agriculture, of food production, of factories, or juices, milk, and so forth. But none of that exists right now in Libya, and it's slowly all of these factories, they have been shut down, they have been dismantled, the machines have been used as scrap metal, and how it's being used, it's again shipped to another country gives you US dollars, and that's it. But it means that the Libyan people are making money out of the oil. But this is not development. This is just, Am I being cutting off?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
So maybe try turning your camera off and then see if your voice just comes through, and it's
Okay.
less.
It's also third world connection, so I'll
Yeah,
turn the camera.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but I think my remarks for your points about that are over, so feel free to go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I mean that's you got dubbed the economics expert yesterday, Jared. So I feel like
well, that's a mistake. Because again, all I really do is follow the narrative, the claims, and read other people's data to see how they don't match. So, but when it comes to, well, the one thing I don't think I've heard you talk about is somewhat related to that, and I hope I didn't just miss something, that one of the things that made Gaddafi a threat to the West was his efforts to not only pan-Arabicize, but to pan-African, and to do so on the basis of the creation of a separate currency, a break from connections to France and others' currencies, and to which, unlike a lot of the claims around crypto enthusiasts today, was actually designed to had the goal in mind of freeing Africa collectively from the Bretton Woods controls of the West. So if there's something you would want to say about that, and maybe how that effort connects to what you're talking about here, or to the extent it does, I'd appreciate hearing some more on that.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. I agree with what you said in terms of the destruction of Libya, the overthrow of the Libyan government. And if you click on my name on Black Agenda Report, you'll see I've written an article that was rejected from, and I like to bash them, Jadaliya, Africa as a Country. I was rejected from Jacobin magazine because they said this is being revisionist, this is Libya as an Arab country, where you're trying to Africanize it, and so forth. And it's that the article is titled "The De-Africanization and Re-Europeanization of Libya." So continent-wise, it's very funny. It's kind of like it's as if those racist Arabs who tend to proclaim that no, we're not Africans, but I mean, Africa is diverse, right? And yes, there's a history of Arabs' conquest and expansion to Northern Africa, but they were lighter-skinned people in Northern Africa from before. But I mean, it's not also about race. It's about political economy and history. You look at all of the African continent, all of it is colonized, right? All of it has imperialist tentacles. All of it is extremely rich in resources. But we also tend to be the poorest people, extremely wealthy, but poorest people. So there's an inherent contradiction that all of the African continent, history, present, and future, we're all facing. Hence the necessity of creating this unity. And so Libya, I think from the early 70s has, the Revolutionary Command Council in Libya. They were not just people who are military, Arab pan-Arabists, and that's it. They looked at what Jamal Abdel Nasser was doing, and there's no contradiction between Arab unity and African unity. People like to say, well, Arabs, they tend to think unity. The Gulf monarchies, they always say, well, we're monarchs and you're not. We're here in the Gulf Peninsula. We have similar history and culture. You don't. So they want to make it like Asian Arabs and then the African Arabs. And then when you go with the Arabs in Northern Africa and you say, let's talk about African unity, they say, well, we're the Northern Africa, but then the rest is, we're very culturally different. I'm like, this is embedded in hardcore racism. If you look at the term, even sub-Saharan Africa, which is a very racist and problematic term, it was used to describe Northern Africa and South Africa, the country. Up until 1994, when the apartheid regime was overthrown, South Africa transformed into being sub-Saharan Africa because the white people are not in charge anymore there. And so it just tells you how this term is racially charged. It's not about culture, history, political economy, whatever. It's really about race. So people will say, oh, let's do literacy project in sub-Saharan Africa. These are like 40 some countries, and you want to amalgamate them and you want to decipher them as if they're a unison. No, this is like literally racism. So the Libyan government, since it was a proponent of Arab unity and African unity, realized all of these contradictions that exist of imperialism and so forth. So as years passed, and I've been doing a lot of archival research this whole past year, especially with my good friend Matteo Capasso. He also wrote a book about Libya. We're looking at newspapers being produced from 70s, 80s, 90s, and you'll see the exerted effort from Libya to try to invite leaders, workers, organizers, labor unions to go and meet in different summits that the Libyan government funded. That project died off a bit because of the harshening of the sanctions and the isolationism that Libya experienced. Now, after 1999, when Libya contributed to the establishment of the African Union, to substitute the Organization of African Unity, it was established in Sirte, a city in the center of Libya, and it was like, this is going to be the center of Libya, the gateway to Africa. Now, the idea behind this new African Union that substituted the Organization of African Unity was trying to create. There's a World Bank. We're going to create African Bank. There's IMF. We're going to create the African Monetary Fund. So we're going to create alternative institutions. But then they said there's again the contradiction of the hegemony of US dollar. At the time, roughly 85% of global transactions were being conducted in US dollars. So they said we need to create our own currency. So as your listeners might know, is that the United States just prints money. It doesn't need to back it with anything. And it did that through the Marshall Plan after World War II. It imposed itself to be the hegemonic power because it was the most productive country. It would kind of industrialize Western Europe largely, and it became like the hegemonic currency. So Libya and the African Union at the time, they said we're going to create an alternative plan, which is that we create a currency that is backed by the thing that we have the most and the most valuable on the continent, which is gold. So the plan was that this gold is going to be used across the African continent, and it's going to be backed by this currency is going to be backed by gold, and it's going to be shifting away all of the Niger, Sahelian states, Burkina Faso, Western African countries, and so forth, transform them from using the French CFA to this golden African dinar. Libya is going to use the golden African dinar. Everybody's going to have the same currency. And it's going to be backed not by this fictitious value of US bonds that exist, but it's going to be backed by gold. Now, it's funny, and you probably see a lot of Western commentators, they always joke about France that it has tons and tons of gold reserves, but it doesn't have any gold mines. Meanwhile, Mali has tons of gold mines in Burkina Faso, but they don't have any reserves. So this is primary. The role of imperialism is that it takes from the global south and gives it to the north, and then we get pittances and breadcrumbs. The whole infrastructure of this financial system that was spearheaded by Libya before 2011 was going to be a catastrophic threat to the hegemony of US imperialism and the dollar. Now, what you realize if you read the WikiLeaks emails Hillary Clinton in 2011, it says that France and the US intervened in Libya because they wanted to overthrow the Libyan government because it was developing a currency that's going to unite Africa and be a substitute for the French CFA and the US dollar. And the reason why we overthrow this because we don't want this project to happen. Now, who do they support in order to achieve this project? They supported the most racist Libyans. So Libyans, we have racism. We acknowledge we have hardcore anti-blackness. It exists, just like in much of Egypt, Tunisia, and so forth, right? And so they're the ones who are in charge of the Libyan Transitional Council. So they withdrew all of the funding to the African Union. We don't fund the African Union anymore. It's funny. The African Union is largely funded by the EU. The enemy essentially is funding the African Union. We had a satellite, Vascom satellite, that Libya was funding in order to have satellite agency or autonomy over the African continent. That got privatized, and I think France bought it. So instead of Elon Musk sending his Starlink and so forth, we would have our own. So all of these things, they were destroyed. And then lastly, and this is a lot of people don't know it. I mean, Horace Campbell, we have discussed it sometime. A lot of people have heard that Libya has this man-made river that Gaddafi built in the 1980s that right now everybody just turns on the faucet at every home in Libya, and they have water thanks to the aquifers that exist in sandstone Nubian, in the desert, right? And that one extends to Chad, to part of Egypt, and it's tons of water that existed before thousands of years in a region that was not desert as it is right now. And so Libya has created this man-made river. Now, because of the drought that's happening in Lake Chad, roughly 90% of it has evaporated or polluted, so there's only 10% left. Libya was saying, we want to even use some of our man-made river to replenish that lake so that it gets back to 40%, 50%. And what would that lead to? More fishing, more farming, more economic development happening in that region. But then right now, when Libya got de-Africanized and the leadership was re-Europeanized, what do we have? We have leadership who say, well, we don't care about Africa. Africa is poor. Africa is backward. Africa is, there's nothing good comes from Africa. If we want to develop and be like the West, we have to follow what they're telling us. And so this is how Libya got de-Africanized and re-Europeanized. And so nobody is talking about golden African dinar anymore. Nobody's talking about, in Libya especially, talking about this unity between the climate change together, none of those things. And so the project, again, so right now, not only they destroyed Libya or destroyed the African Unity Project with their NATO proponents, but they also have enabled the stagnation and de-development of the region. Meaning the development that was happening and progressing in a amazingly exponential fashion was stagnated and then reversed. And so there's everything is back rolling. We're going back to Stone Age right now. And this is, I guess, a strategic interest of U.S. imperialism, that whenever they come and join and join the forces and they try to do this thing, they always try to integrate you in this imperialist system so that you become obedient and subservient. And this is, it hurts me to see even friends of mine in Ghana. They export 1 kilo of cocoa, and that kilo gets produced to how many chocolate bars in Belgium or France or whatever fancy, Lindt or Ferrero Rocher or whatever, and each one you sell it for $1.50, but the kilo is like for 20 cents or something like that. Who makes the profit? It has always been that the global north makes it, but how can we revisit this equation of African unity with, anti-imperialist financial monetary policy? This should be the goal of how to combat imperialism. And unfortunately, NATO has been successful in stifling that through the destruction of Libya. Yeah, so.
I almost don't want to talk after Essam talk, because like, you are just dropping so much information, and it's not, none of it is surprising to hear, because this is what the West does, right? But I think it's something that does not get discussed. Like, it just simply, like, people, I think, kind of gloss over how the internal workings of these countries get completely undone and then remade in the way that is beneficial to the West. And so it just gets lost. I just don't even.
And you know me, I'm petty, so I've been hating on Jacobin since 2015. So you had me at they blocked the article. This we're going to be the sole definers of all that's left, regardless of where in the world we're discussing and when in time is remarkable. So I appreciate that. And the reminder of that history as well, in terms of the WikiLeaks reveals Hillary Clinton's involvement. So and then again, because that was the first time, if I remember correctly, that was the first time I remember reading about the collaboration again with Al-Qaeda in overthrowing Gaddafi. And I admit it, and it was a sort of a latent, naive response of mine at the time. I was like, damn, even them. I was like, if there was any one group that was at least going to be not acknowledged to be in allied relationships with the U.S. at any given moment, I would have thought it was them. But when you hear what you're saying and learn more about that history, of course, they would much rather revisit a relationship with Al-Qaeda and more conservative Muslims than anything akin to what Gaddafi was up to. So.
Right,
yeah.
No, I mean, it's funny that when Libya is the first country to put Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden on a terrorist list. And they did that before even 9/11. And when they did that, they said, look at this pan-Arab secular cycle who's oppressing the Islamists or Muslims in his country. They try to frame anybody who questions the useful idiots of imperialism, and I like to use that term because they're so easily co-opted, is that they get framed as this crazy opposition to something. So when Nasser had assassination attempt against him by the Muslim Brotherhood, he did imprison and then also they executed some of those because it was an act against the state. They say, oh look, he's killing Muslims because he's secular. Libya was the same thing when the Libyan Islamic fighting group that were trained by the MI6 and they were, friends with the Taliban and fighting against the Soviets, they were flown back in Libya. Oh, look, Gaddafi is oppressing Muslims. And I guess right now it's going to be the same thing. Right now, China is going to be suppressing Uyghur Muslims, the very Muslims who fought on the side of Al-Qaeda in Syria. And then they just came out and said, we have established our great caliphate here in Syria. We overthrew this dictatorial person who does not allow Muslims to be Muslims. And right now, inshallah, we will declare the same victory in China. My God, and then the CIA's project in China is to create that same unstabilization in Western China in order to supplant the establishment of the Belt and Road Initiative, because that region where the Uyghurs exist, they are the largest population, and it cuts through them. And cuts through them is the wrong wording. It means like it divides society or whatever, but it's a Belt and Road Initiative is a way to connect people, not divide people. So yeah, it's the same propaganda constantly that you hear. And then even in one of the emails of Jake Sullivan, who wrote to Hillary Clinton in 2012, at the beginning of the fighting in Syria, he said, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. And this is clearly stated. AQ is on our side in Syria. They said that. But then, and this is kind of my annoying critique of always saying that, Essam, if somebody wants change in a country, and then somebody else comes and supports them, give those people agency. If somebody else comes and support them, that does not mean that they like who's giving them support. So let's give you an example. In Iran, there were women protesting 2 years ago against some of the laws pertaining to hijab and head coverings. Who goes and supports that movement and funds it? It's the National Endowment of Democracy, the CIA, US government, and the Zionist entity. It is so funny to see a video of these Zionist women standing up in videos saying in Hebrew that we standing up with the women of Iran against this repression by the regime. And I'm like, these are the enemies of Iran going there to support this movement. Now, you say, Essam, are you pro-oppression of women? Absolutely not. But then when you bring up the question of, the primary contradiction, just like Renee earlier said, you stand up with the people. You stand with the people against imperialism, the people who are anti-imperialist, not just any people. So you have people saying, well, the fact that I am doing this thing, that I don't want the Bashar al-Assad's government to be in Syria or Gaddafi in Libya or whatever, and then you see the Zionists cheering you, yeah, bravo, bravo, and you have the Islamists coming and joining you, you should have like a moment of reflection saying, am I what I'm doing? Is it the correct thing or not? Why are the evils of humanity supporting me in doing this? This is the key thing that, in any social movement, we should be questioning. If you're seeing somebody, protesting, and then you see the CIA supporting them, we should ask the question, why is the CIA supporting this person? We should just like pause. I'm not saying that that person is an asset of the CIA, but they're just being a functionary. And I think this is the key thing that we should be centering in any of these social movements, revolutions, uprisings, and whatnot. But people, they tend to say, no, Essam, they like to use the Marxist term of Gramsci. They say this is the historic, bloc. It's a unity of forces coming together to fight against this authoritarian government or whatever. But I'm like, okay, so you're okay with the unity of Islam, of reactionary Islamists, imperialists, Zionists in order to overthrow the government. They say, yeah, well, they're siding with me as I want to get rid of this oppression. But this is the issue, is that once you're done with that oppressive person, be it Bashar al-Assad or whatever you want to call, the next day, those people are not going to be your friends. And the same thing that happened in Libya. After 2011, the liberals, some of them were assassinated. Some of them were in jail. Their lives were threatened. Some of the social democrats, even in Libya in 2011, the same thing experienced. The socialists in Libya, the Ba'athists in Libya, where are they right now? None of them exist, because why? You cannot trust the people who are behind your movement, such as the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, Al-Qaeda, and so forth. And so when I'm seeing what's happening in Syria, same thing. Same thing right now. People are saying, oh, we're just so happy that we got rid of this and now it's time to build, as if that there's going to be unity the next day after. And there hasn't been unity. There is still the Kurdish question. There's still the Americans occupying northeast Syria. There's still the Zionists coming and infiltrating Syria. And there are people, the Sunnis and the Shia within Syria, and they're killing off each other. So it's going to be not a smooth trip for Syria, unfortunately, in the future. But, this is what one gets. It's kind of like that parable that says the king fell off the horse and he made a large noise and everybody tried to get the king back on the horse, but he wasn't able to get back on the horse. And this is the same thing with Libya, that we just we had a horse and it fell and we tried to build back the country, but now it's still being in this cycle of de-development. Just because we decided to side with, Al-Qaeda terrorists, side with the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and all these reactionary forces.
Right, Jared. Exactly.
Yes.
So we did have a question in the chat that I wanted to ask you, because I think, just we'll throw it in before, because it actually leads to my next question. But Leah is asking how you view the AES Confederation and its impact on what's happening.
Well, this is actually, personally, I view it as an extremely positive thing. The alliance of Sahel states exists right now currently between Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. Because, look at this. You look at the demography of Mali. They have at least 20 ethnic groups. There's no supreme majority. A lot of people say the Bambara people, or people who speak Bambara, are the majority. But there's so much diversity. Burkina Faso, same thing. And so much diversity in Niger. But how did these three countries decide to create a sense of unity? By, centering anti-imperialism. And I think this is a very good question, Leah, from you, is that the developments that are happening there is really a lesson for the rest of us in Africa. So this is, I'll reflect personally first as Essam and then maybe talk a little bit broadly, because it has reignited a sense of, that African unity is it needs to be achieved through power. You cannot just create podcasts and write Twitter posts and things like that, and you think you have a revolution the next day. You need imperialism, how it operates. It's through power. It's namely financial power and military power. And the people of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, what they have done is that they allied with the military power in order to kick out the foreign troops, namely American and French, and now they're working on the financial monetary power. But then obviously they need help, and who they're asking help from is Russia. So in my view, that they are a model of how to be anti-imperialist in Africa today. And as you heard yesterday, Chad also joined them in kicking out French troops from Chad. And potentially you might even see Chad joining this alliance of Sahel states. So this is kind of, I view it as a positive thing. Hopefully it's contagious, like COVID in a way, because we need that passion of anti-imperialism coming from our neighbors. But unfortunately, Libyans, here's how colonized our mindset is. On the 26th of May, one day after the celebration of Africa Liberation Day, this year, 2025, there was a summit or like an event, a panel or whatever, organized by the Center of African Studies, which is a Libyan center that exists here in Tripoli. And it's talking about the events that are happening, in the center, what it does, its role, why it started, and so forth. And it's like very lame academics speaking. There's nothing feisty, revolutionary. And then one person says, yeah, and then look at what's happening in Africa. Even yesterday, our bank in Burkina Faso, it was stolen by Burkina Faso. They took it from us. I didn't hear the news, right? So I Googled it instantly on my phone. I looked it up and I read that Burkina Faso nationalized Libya's banks in Africa, in Burkina Faso. But then I stopped to remember, I have some people who have worked in that bank years before. So I contacted them and I said, what's the condition of that bank? They said, well, it's a bank that doesn't provide as many services as before. And I said, is it because of the sanctions? They said, yes. I was like, do we own all of it? They said, no, it's roughly like 60% Libya, 40% Burkina Faso. And they said, can we use any of the assets, or only 60% of the assets are frozen and the 40% are not? They said the 40% are not frozen. The 60% that belong to Libya are frozen. So now, what Burkina Faso did, and the Pan-African position is as follows. They said, well, because Libya is sanctioned and the assets are frozen, maybe we should nationalize the bank, take the assets, and they become 100% unfrozen. So they lifting of the sanctions, essentially. Now, this is a great success in my view, because they have outsmarted imperialism, and now they don't have an excuse to freeze those assets anymore. And that will help also Burkina Faso's bank to develop, which is the central bank of Burkina Faso. Now, the Libyans, the racist Libyans, they view things through racism only, and they say, oh, look at these Africans stole our assets. And I'm like, no, they literally nationalized the resource because you Libyans are not able to stand up against the sanction system or challenge the sanctions. So what Burkina Faso did I think was good. For me as a Libyan, oh my God, Libyans, we don't have as many assets as before because it got nationalized. I might look at it from this nationalist sense. This is bad for us. But I'm not fighting imperialism on my own. I'm fighting imperialism as a whole global system. And when I see somebody is actually outsmarting imperialism, I commend them and want to learn from them. So now, this is how the debate is going on in Libya, that these are purely military coups done by military people, and they're not going to relinquish power for some reason, and they're siding with Russia. This is how it's being viewed largely. So, but then me, when I'm talking to people, every time I speak to people, I like to use this, Socratic method of asking questions, and then getting back an answer, and slowly to get to the bottom of imperialism. That this is why they nationalized the bank. It's not that they hate Libyans or they steal our money or whatever, like any of those racist mantras, talking points. So in my view, it's very positive development. And I think there are a lot of lessons to be drawn from it. I haven't been able to check the Anti-Imperialist Summit that took place in Niger last month. Just been caught up with travels and writing my dissertation. But there are things happening positively in that part of the African continent. So thank you for your question, Leah.
So look, Jared is pulling a Jared on me, just so you know. He's doing that. I was just gonna let you talk, and I'm gonna let Renee ask the questions, and I'm just gonna take it all in. This is what Jared does to me. But this is, I don't often go back and watch our shows because I, like Jared, don't like to listen to myself speak. I think it's weird. And so I often don't go back, but I'm going to go back and listen because I feel like on the second listen, I'm going to hear like 80 things that I didn't catch the first time you said them. And then you're going to get a really long email from me that says, okay, can you clarify this a little more? And then we're going to have to bring you back again, I think, because I feel like this is going to get a lot of extra questions because people just don't get this information. It's just not available. And so I thank you.
Thank you. Also, thank you for inviting me, and also for these interesting questions and comments. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
So I want to make sure that we take some time to talk about the axis of resistance and how what is happening right now in Syria is going to have, an impact on the Palestinian people, and this has been an ongoing conversation here because we fully recognize the genocide for what it is. And we've been watching the quasi support that has come from some, I don't want to say quasi support, that's bad terminology, but the difficulty in providing support for the Palestinian people because of the role that the West is playing in arming Israel, right? So it's an unbalanced fight, right? And there's been it's been very limited, the ability for those entities that have chosen to support Palestine to be able to do so. And now, this turn in Syria has created a real issue as far as continuing to be able to get those supplies and to be able to support and try to fight off the Zionist entity that is, destroying Palestine and genociding the Palestinian people. But you used a term in your article that if you could, one, explain that term, and then two, because I think they're connected, talk about what this change in Syria is now going to do in regards to the genocide in Palestine and the attempts that were being made to support the Palestinian people. But the term you used was cordon sanitaire. And I'd never seen that term before. And so could you explain that to folks? Because I know people are now they're going to go back and read your article. And so could you explain that and then talk about what all of this means for the Palestinian people?
So the cordon sanitaire, it kind of translates to a buffer zone. When there's an outbreak of illness or something like that, you put people in quarantine. You create a zone that it shouldn't be trespassed, so the transmission of diseases or something like that doesn't take place. But Ali Qadri, he used it in his book, this cordon sanitaire, the French term, because it really speaks to how the Zionist entity's relations to imperialism and Japan, South Korea's relationship to imperialism at the same time. So if there was no Zionist entity and there's no Japan as in its current form and South Korea, we will have a world where United States has direct confrontation with its so-called enemies, meaning China, meaning the Arab countries. So what do you need to create? You need to create a buffer zone. What exists in that buffer zone? It's your ally. what does that ally do? It allows you to, send your weapons. You allow them to develop, right? By sending them technology development, give them a lot of aid, like they did with Japan and South Korea. And so when they develop, they become subservient to you. And there's always a lot of this debate: is the Zionist entity control the Congress, or the Congress needs the Zionist entity? It's a dialectic relationship between the two. The same thing, not a lot of people talk about Japan's influence on U.S. foreign policy in South Korea at the same time. So this existence of, buffer zone or cordon sanitaire is essential for U.S. imperialism. Now, this term, it's funny enough, it's being used by the war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu when he says that we're going into the Golan Heights and expanding so that there's this buffer zone and we won't get attacked by people in Syria. They go inside Lebanon and they say we're going to create a buffer zone, and so Hezbollah cannot attack us. And this is bullshit, because sorry for the language, but this is major.
No, it's bullshit. It's bullshit. You're good. You're good.
Yeah, it is. Because we know that Hezbollah has rockets that could go beyond the buffer zone. We know that Iran and Iraq has rockets that go beyond that. We know that Yemen has the same thing. Right? So it's not about just territorial acquisition. It's about literally creating this idea of the greater so-called Israel. But they use this term buffer zone just to signify that we're just expanding a little bit so you don't attack us, or if you attack us, it won't reach our people. But in reality, it's a law, formulated by the United States of how can development happen in East Asia and West Asia, such that it allows those countries to develop economically, but at the same time, as a foreign policy, they become obedient and continue to be obedient to the United States. And so this is what I kind of drew from the work of Ali Qaderi. And this is very, essentialized, simplified explanation of that heavy read of, anti-imperialist Marxism. What does this mean to Lebanon particularly? The Hezbollah hasn't been, engaging in combat since 2006. And the new Qadar, they got more experience since 2012 in Syria, because they went and stood against imperialism in Syria. Now, and so Syria was, okay, we can also train your troops, because the Syrian army is a very strong army in the region. And so they were also training Hezbollah at the same time. And so there's a connection between Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Syrian government. At the same time, you have the people in Iraq and Iran are supporting one another. So this is like a whole land bridge, and they're all against the Zionist entity. When the National Liberation Movement started on October 7th, and I call it National Liberation because that was the intent of it, the goal was, to ignite a fervor or ignite a passion amongst the Arab masses and the Islamic Muslim masses to go and stand against the Zionist entity. But unfortunately, only the axis of resistance stood against the Zionist entity. No rocket has been launched from Egypt. No rocket has been launched from Saudi Arabia, from Jordan, from UAE, from Kuwait. None of those. Who launched rockets? It was the axis of resistance only. Now, when you cut off that land bridge, and especially Hezbollah, how they opened a northern front, as they call it, a front that is of northern settler colonial Zionist entity and south of Lebanon, they kind of to offset the pressure that's happening on Gaza and the resistance that exists there. So that was kind of part of the agreement, is that between the axis of resistance broadly, and then particularly Hezbollah and the resistance within Gaza. Now, there was this peace agreement between Hezbollah and the Zionist entity, because there's a different type of warfare, and I think this is just a tangent, that the axis of resistance is conducting, and the Zionist entity. The Zionist entity does not care about civilians. And the Zionist entity's reputation is screwed up, across the whole region. Nobody, wants them. I'm talking about the masses. When they go and bomb civilians in Lebanon, more and more, Lebanese people are going to hate the Zionist entity. But Hezbollah, they have rockets. They could launch it at civilians in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, in whatever you want to call it. But they will not do that, because what they're relying on is that the internal contradictions within the Zionist entity to foment and continue. They want people to be, fighting internally within the Zionist entity. And this is what has been happening since October 7, 2023, is that you have people inside the Zionist entity saying, we want to overthrow the government. This government is, too hard right-wing. And there's, people being imprisoned. The economic situation also is not as good as it was in the Zionist entity and so forth. So this was the objective of Hezbollah's opening up that northern front. So there's a different type of warfare. The rockets that Hezbollah shoots, it targets military equipment. But when the Zionists go and attack another country, they don't give, excuse the language, shit about human lives. Like as we saw in genocide in Gaza, and also in a matter of just 2 weeks, you killed 3,000 civilians inside Lebanon, which is a crazy number if you think about it, that you're just having this long distance warfare between the two. So now Hezbollah signs this ceasefire deal for 60 days. And that means that all of Hezbollah's fighting factions are not going to be participating in any combat against the Zionist entity. And that unfortunately includes, their troops stationed in Syria. And we have to all agree that, unfortunately, Hezbollah did face a major blow, because they are not only fighting the Zionist entity on its own, they're fighting imperialism. Who is supporting the Zionist entity? It's NATO. It's the United States, and the Zionists themselves. So they're not just fighting one country against another. I wish if it were that simple. Otherwise, the Zionist entity would have been gone many, many decades ago. And so once they did that ceasefire and withdrew their troops from combat in Syria, it has been weakened Syria's position. And so that's why the events unfolded super fast within Syria. And now that the Syria is in the hands of these reactionary Zionist Islamists, you will not have an axis of resistance that's connected with land bridge. You cannot have equipment easily transferred to Lebanon, because most of the equipment is being transferred through convoys, military convoys, via land. Now that has been undermined, the land bridge. And so the destruction of Syria, in my view, is one of the biggest blows the axis of resistance has faced throughout this war of national liberation, because it meant that right now, they're just being countries separated by these different buffer zones, the cordon sanitaire. You have a buffer zone inside Syria right now. You have a buffer zone, obviously Turkey is a NATO country. And then you have a buffer zone of this whole monarchies, Kuwait, UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. So all of these are buffer zones, and they're constantly expanding. Hence, to create countries that are allied with the Western imperialist system. So so that's why I view it as a colossal defeat. Well, it's not a defeat; it's just a loss of battle, but not the war, in my view. So,
thank you. Yeah, those were my questions, Jared. So
I just had, I don't know, did you answer this one from 2Fs?
Oh,
what's your dissertation on?
Oh, okay. Yeah,
and I know you're tired. I got to ask you the proverbial.
Yeah.
When I want to quickly ask you the proverbial question that everybody hates when they're writing the dissertation, which is, how is your dissertation coming?
Well, I've had difficulty writing this dissertation because this whole zeitgeist of just genocide and everything. And I was in Libya from 2023 June to October. And I was in the US just for 2 months, from October to December, to teach a course, and thinking that I'll be writing. So I have the outline and everything, but I just wasn't able to write. So now that I'm back here in Libya, I'll be just using all my time to.
I think you cut out there.
Right. Sorry, yeah. You can hear me,
I'm sorry.
Right?
Say what you're writing on again.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, the topic, the heading is called The Geopolitics of Textbooks in Contemporary Libya. And the focus is on how are the textbooks being written, given the fact that the content that exists inside them. So I analyzed the textbooks, especially history, geography, and civic education, And then I interviewed the authors who come from this textbook center and who work in the Ministry of Education, and try to kind of map ideology. What do they stand for? What do they stand against? And then essentially you start realizing that it's not just these Libyan people who are writing these textbooks. There's so many foreign influences, hence the geopolitics of education. So yeah, this is kind of the dissertation is about how geopolitics influence the content of Libya's education textbooks. And you'll really, like, once it's done, you'll see how Global Fragility Act, the CIA, and everything are infiltrated also Libya's education system. So stay tuned once I write this thing.
So the misspelling notwithstanding, this sounds fascinating. And good luck, congratulations, and definitely thank you for coming through. Look forward to the next build.
Thank you so much. So I do have to excuse myself. I just want to say thank you again for this opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts. And yes, Renee, I'm always one text away, so feel free to continue the conversation.
I will definitely be in touch. And as things are going, please, we'll invite you to come back. Good luck with the writing. Hopefully you can get, you sound like poor Mahi trying to get to the work.
Exactly.
So good, best of luck, and we'll definitely be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Peace. Yeah, that was pretty good.
And I want y'all all to know that this was like me reading the group text and being like, yeah, we just gonna have to make this happen. So then my next text is to Jared to say, all right, so I just sent a text and we're gonna see if it can make it work. And I'm so excited that he was able to get here and join, and that was a lot. I'm definitely gonna have to go back and listen to this one because he was dropping so much information that I just literally didn't know. Probably half of what he was talking about was new information to me, and so I'm gonna have to go back and listen and really get some more of those details and do some.
Yeah, and this will be easy for me to do because I didn't say much, so I don't have to worry about hearing myself. But that was
you are the worst. You are the worst.
But but there's a lot in there that deserves some repeat and follow up.
Yeah, and there's some great articles in Black Agenda Report that also just go further into the history of Syria. Margaret Kimberly has a really good article, and then Ajamu also has a really good article. That's all, it's the same information, not the same information. It's just more extensive information about what is happening in that area. And I have not gone to Ben Norton's channel in a while to see some of his feedback on this. So I'll be doing that.
Yeah, he put something out earlier, like within the last, very recently, last several hours. And I was looking at it this morning, and just more thorough background into what all this is, and very similar to what Essam was saying, that it's beyond just Syria, and this is not good. This is not good. So whatever you thought of Assad and whoever else, this ain't it.
Right.
And but yeah, and that's so similar to what you were saying. My very inexpert approach is if I start seeing my neighbors waving flags of other countries and putting some, I'm like, that's not who I'm supposed to support.
Right.
So it's like, but and you start to see more, not so much with the flags in terms of this region, but whether it's Ukraine, which you still see flags flying around here, and Israel, and then soon enough it'll be, let's praise this new hero of Syria.
Right.
Like, son.
Right. I mean, the interview when they brought him on CNN in the suit, and I was like, wait, what? what is happening right now? What is going on right now? And I don't know if you saw that mess where they were live in the dungeons in Syria, and they came across the man like regularly.
I saw the story, right? The woman, and apparently, I think the CBS reporter, right? She has a track record of some funky reporting,
right?
Where they claim that they had just freed this guy or something like that. Is that the one you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah,
And then they've just come back now with another
that's
story
it.
that
Clarissa Ward's lying at.
Because they just didn't know what they were going to come across. It's all just so. Western media, man. I just can't. But we have a few minutes, so I don't know if you've been watching these pardon stories.
No.
Whew, the pardon stories. So this was just there's on our little sheet, our cheat sheet, and this is my fault because I dropped those in this morning because I shout out to Mani because she posted this in one of my chat groups, and I was like, wait, what is going on here? So I just highlighted it yellow, the Kansas City Defender article. So the governor of Missouri has decided that he's going to utilize right. So the headline is Break-ins. Missouri Governor frees Eric. I'm not going to mess with that last name. The first white cop in Kansas City history convicted for lynching a black person.
Eric the Lyncher. That's what his name is.
There you go. The Lyncher.
Wow.
Right. And it's important to point out that this is the same place that just state-sanctioned murdered Khalifa, who everyone came forward to say something, this even the prosecutors came forward to say that the case was not, properly done. And despite the multiple efforts to get the governor to move forward, that did not happen. They took Khalifa Williams's life. Governor had no issue with it, but he gonna use his powers to do this.
This is nothing short of declaration of war against and a license to kill black people in Missouri. I guess my only issue is that this declaration has long been made, but
yeah, I agree.
The Lyncher is back on the streets. Are they going to rehire him back to the police force?
I mean, they might. You never know with these folks. You never know. But this is just in line because, let's not get it twisted. This is what we're going to do now. So the next article on that row is out of Pennsylvania. And so, everybody was excited about Biden pardoning the 1,500 people. And I read a few articles because I was trying to get.
Oh, he let the kids for cash judge out. Yo.
Right. So
and folks, just for the record, I remember this story. Because I know we need to ease the tension of our audience. These are white kids that these judges were framing up and taking money and sending to prison. And I remember when I used to watch Democracy Now!, they had the footage of that white mother trying to put hands on that judge when they walked him out because her son killed himself as a result, or I'm sorry, and whatever the phrases we're supposed to use. Her son took his own life as a result of him suffering his life being ruined by this judge who took money to put him in jail. So this is
Right.
not your run of the mill we enslave Africans. This is even the
Right.
whites.
Right.
This is crazy.
It's crazy. So if you scroll down a little bit more, you'll see that there's some other very interesting people on this list who got these pardons. And this is specific to Pennsylvania, and I'm trying to decide how much of a rabbit hole I want to fall down trying to figure out who the other folks are.
Oh, look at that. You gotta love that algorithm, boy.
There you go. There you go. Sorry, keep going. It's there you go. There you go. So those are the commuted sentences.
Off the
top. So these are some of the other folks that have been commuted in Pennsylvania. So we've got the former police officer. We've got the person who was doing armed bank robberies, which I'm not super mad at, because sometimes you need to find money. You got the hospice owner who was stealing money from Medicare. You had the rehab owner who was selling heroin to former patients, because you got to make sure that people.
That's hot back. Right there. That's hot right there. I'm gonna get them at the rehab.
Right. And then you have the CEO of a Pennsylvania soft drink company who ran a pyramid scheme and was able to build a mansion and buy some jewelry. So
spoiler alert, Mumia is not on the list.
Right.
Spoiler.
Although so it's just, as we watch some of these things play out and everybody was up in arms because he pardoned his son, which I don't know why anybody was surprised that happened. And people are already talking about the January 6 people who are going to get pardons. And, I question, the people who are really up in arms about the January 6 people that could get out, are they equally up in arms right now about the people that Biden is letting off the hook? Because this whole, we're going to focus on this large group of people who were sent to, do their terms from home because of COVID. And then I think of the Black political prisoners who remain in prison despite COVID, right? Despite illness, despite all those things. And I just, I had to ask the question, is anybody looking at this list of these 1,500 people? Because I'm super curious about who the rest of these people are.
Again, I get it. You're right. I get it.
Yeah.
Mumia is on stage. I get it. But as we've pointed out before,
right,
as the president, you have rumors of influence and an infinite access to as many bully pulpits and platforms as you want. You could have just thrown it. He could easily just throw it in there as an asterisk. And if I could, I would free Mumia, and I would encourage the state of Pennsylvania to free Mumia. I mean, that's all I'm saying. I get it. And I think the astute audience.
Just want to point out, so ML posted, he also, this is for the governor of Missouri, he also pardoned 2 people who did over 30 years in prison, including the Black man Paige Spears. The gov is definitely an asshole. Cameron Lamb deserves justice. I'm glad that Paige and Patty Pruitt are free, so thank you for sharing. But I feel like this is what happens consistently. You have, this work that happens. You have people who they do the bare minimum to say, well, look, we did this good thing. And then the other 99% of what they do is not actually helpful. Right. And so I don't know. I need that list. I think it might be a worthwhile rabbit hole to look at. And, and yes, ML, and I thought I said it, but they're all people who are on post-conviction supervision based on the CARES Act. So, But one must also question, like, why is it that the judge who made millions of dollars sending young people to prison in order to support his buddies who were running the private prison system for youth offenders, like, why was he allowed to go home during COVID? Right. And that I don't even recall that making the news. Like, I don't even recall that being a conversation, right? Like, do you recall? I recall the story because I remember when the story broke that he was making millions of dollars locking up young people. But I don't recall anybody making a big deal about the fact that he was allowed to finish out his sentence from home despite that. It's not just me.
No, it's not just you.
I mean, I'm sick of all of it. And I'm ready for the empire to die. I know that's saying a lot because I live in it, but we live in the belly of the beast, as Claudia always says. But I just
yeah. So it looks like ML is going to be sending you some links.
Oh, yes. Thank you, ML. Appreciate you. All right, so y'all are gonna get it since ML is doing all this work to send me some of this stuff. I'll fall down a little bit of a rabbit hole. Why not? But correct, white supremacy is always.
In just a couple minutes here, since we got a second and it came up earlier in the chat, I just want to say again that it is time for me to reinstitute my joke about Tyler Perry films being played on the buses and the trains that are taking us to the death camps. I put it on 1.5 times speed, but I watched this latest Netflix film about the 688 and Kerry Washington's, starring role and all this stuff.
Oh, is that a Tyler Perry?
Oh, it's a Tyler Perry. It's a Tyler Perry masterpiece.
Oh,
and you get a lot of the Tyler Perry-isms are on display in this thing. But it's just a mess. And what's my little note here? If you want to they want to valorize Black people who want to become part of the American mythological narrative while demeaning or ignoring radical traditions. Because I was like, why? No disrespect to these Black women who went over there, and it's not unimpressive what they did and had to put up with, but it's all in service of the U.S. military machine. And
right.
it's all in this and then this overemphasis on this woman's never to have been romance with this white man and a Jew in particular who's killed in the war. And I tried to look it up even. I was like, wait a minute. And they did actually know each other, and he did inspire her to go join after their friendship was interrupted with him going off to war and being killed. But there's nothing, I couldn't find anything that detailed the extent to which they were supposed to have been in love. And then meanwhile, the Black man that she ends up marrying is just like a footnote at the end of the film where she's literally says something like, oh yeah, by the way, I married Harold or something like that. But through the movie, you got the white man just keeps showing up even in ghost form to inspire her. It was wild. It was wild. The whole thing is, it was wild. And I'm sure they had a nice relationship, but it is sad. He went off and got killed in the war and all that and saw that and all that. But it's just, it's not even that. It's like, okay, these are interesting stories. But this is the story when you got this infinite budget and studio and access, and these are the stories you're going to tell. I was like, man, yo. Yeah, anyway. So
I guess I'm
Harold gets Stedman respect. That's exactly it. And Oprah's in the movie. Oprah makes a cameo as Mary McLeod Bethune. And yeah, he gets the Stedman effect. He's just there in the background. But meanwhile, me and Dr. Phil are out here doing the real work. That joy was it was a mess. It was a mess. So I don't even know if these people are, and admittedly, I watched it on 1.5 speed. So if there was any really good acting or cinematography or any of the other things outside of the story that may have been good, I don't mean to disrespect the people who contributed to that, but I wouldn't have caught it because I was like, I just need to get this. I just want to see what they do with the story, and
awful.
It is awful. So it's not even. I wasn't even gonna like. It's not even gonna go to the level of a. I would definitely not ruin our review crew.
No
stuff with that. But
speaking of which, if you're not a Patreon, I don't know how. I don't know what the gap is between when we allow the rest of the folks to watch.
You know what? We got we got a backlog now. I have not released. I haven't gone in and released any of some of these other ones either. So people there's a whole little collection of what we're now calling the review crew, featuring Mtume Gant, Saturdays featuring Mtume Gant, talking about all these movies.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can let me know when you want me to.
I guess them, but I don't know. What's a good time frame so that the Patreon
I don't know.
Feel like
I was just gonna leave them there. I think unconsciously I was like, I'm gonna leave them there. Make people sign up. You got this. But it's whenever. I don't know. Anywhere from 24 hours to whenever. I mean, whenever you want, really. But definitely sign up, support the Patreon, and check some of these conversations.
Was good. Yeah. The conversation we ran the gamut. We talked about a whole lot of stuff for what started out to just be talking about one.
I apologize. I can't add another thing for Discord, but what I can do is tell you what I've done for myself is make a list.
Jared, if you text me the list, I will drop it in the
sorry about that. I didn't mean to do that.
All good. Sorry, I'll drop it in the I'll drop it in the chat in the Discord because I pop in there somewhat regularly.
So what I will do that, and what I did, I'll send it to Renee and also put it in the chat here. I even put where I found, not that we promote these platforms, but where I found some of these films online. So like The Monk and the Gun is on Hulu. Burn is on YouTube for free. 3 Days of the Condor is also on Hulu. Thief is on Amazon. I think I didn't put that there. And Emitai from Semben is on Apple. But those are, if you can find them elsewhere, please do. But those are the films coming up for the review crew on Patreon.
I like that. Like,
I do too, actually. Yeah.
I almost hate giving Geechee credit for stuff, but that was a good.
I know. We could just leave that part out. We can cite all other sources. But you know what I mean? If you're not here, you don't, out of sight, out of mind. We don't need to.
And The Monk and the Gun, when you watch that, I'm gonna have to do some research about the history, because it turns out that there's like information about Bhutan and how this all went down. And I'm curious about how much of the information that's relayed in the movie is actually historical versus like just drama. Because I didn't realize until the end that it was like whatever version of loosely based on historical factualities, like that there's some historical basis to it. So I want to
right. So we saw that. All right, let me put this in here too. So I'm adding. I see that the link to the Discord is not in there, so I'm adding those links back. So the link to the Discord and the Patreon, the Patreon's always there, but the link to the Discord is now in the show description. The link to the Patreon's always there. I think you can also get to, nope, not the Discord. Okay. But the Discord link is now in the show description for those who are interested in it. So it's not that it's been removed. It's sometimes it's really just my fault. There's a rush element to it, and then with some of the destinations that we broadcast, there's a link limit. So sometimes I cut the links that are duplicates. That anyway. Long story short, I'll make sure it gets back in there. But yeah, that's a long story short. I was just going too much of an explanation.
And burn is next, right? That's the next one. Burn.
I thought thief was next.
I thought it was burn.
Oof. Well, I'm gonna watch them all within the next few days. So, but I do need to double check on that. You may be right.
I think burn is. I think burn is next. I think that was the
burn is next. So consensus. That's it. Burn is next.
All right. Well.
All right, listen, everybody, do all the things. No, let's wrap it up. Thank you all very much. Please, although I didn't see the thing, if Warrior Class is going to be on, I don't know. Did they take a hiatus? I don't know. But stay tuned for Warrior Class. Sundays tomorrow with Ear Doctor. If folks have really nothing better to do, I got a live on my channel tonight, a Saturday Night Live featuring Jay-Z. We're gonna start with Jay-Z.
Oh boy.
And just clearing out some buying power stuff that's been piling up on my to-do list. And I've always wanted, I like the idea of a Saturday Night Live. I'm just usually not up this late. So I'm committing to at least 8 o'clock, which is late for me. So I'm gonna do that. That's really late. But yeah. So but that's the earliest I figure you could call it Saturday Night Live. Like, because I would, otherwise I would want to do like Saturday afternoon live.
I feel like anything after 6 is nighttime.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
But
Saturday late afternoon. Saturday late morning live. That's what it would be for me. I'm trying to tell you, it's a bad. We're gonna do it this one time. I'm committing this, but that's about. I don't know.
All right.
But no, thank you very much. Big shout out to Essam. Thanks to you, Renee, for putting that together. Thanks to everybody for coming through. And as always, peace if you're willing to fight for it. Only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And we'll catch you next time, same place, same bat channel with more Saturday with Renee.